Okay, welcome to the bi-weekly meeting of the Kubernetes VMware SIG. We've got a little bit of light attendance today. Fabio, the co-chair, isn't going to be here because VMware has an internal engineering conference called Radio, and a large portion of our regulars are attending that this morning. But we're going to go on without them, and they can catch the recording later. On the agenda today, we're going to start with a discussion of whether we should have a SIG meeting at the next scheduled time, May 30th. The reason why we might not to is it's the week after KubeCon, so I think that in terms of the reporting activity for the projects under this SIG, probably not much is going to go on between now and when that next meeting is scheduled. And that's also a week with a U.S. holiday on the Monday. So I'm guessing that a fair number of people might take time off that week. I'm not sure we have a quorum, but I'm just going to bring it up as an advisory, so people should look before they assume there's a meeting at that time. I think maybe we'll carry on this discussion in the Slack channel or mailing list, given that there aren't that many people here today.
Steve, it could be useful just to throw the idea out there, maybe just to recap what happened at KubeCon, at that session for people who didn't go.
Yeah, you're right. I guess that I'll count that as a vote in favor of holding the meeting then.
I wasn't a vote either way, I was just throwing the idea out there.
And David has just volunteered to get a recap of KubeCon. Moving on, I'm going to, as usual, recap the Slack activity because not everybody has the time or inclination to keep up on what's going on there. But there was a discussion of issues related to topology-aware volume scheduling with dynamic provisioning. And I think in the notes, I recorded a link to an issue that Michael Gash created. And the issue there is that if you're using an older release of Kubernetes, meaning 1.12, you should not fill in the cloud provider parameter for the kubelet on your worker nodes because it apparently, my interpretation is that it confuses the logic going on there. That release doesn't really support the zone-aware topology, but it may trigger some code that you don't want triggered. That's my summary, but you should look at the issue. There was also a discussion regarding enabling the vSphere cloud provider on an existing cluster and the fact that that may require restarting kubelet, the node manager, and API server on all nodes, and that the behavior here may have changed as of 1.14. There actually is a decent blog written on that by Miles. So I'd refer anybody possibly seeing that issue to go look at what's going on. Miles reported in the Slack channel that if you follow the checklist in his blog, you don't have any problems. But somebody who seemed to be writing an Ansible installer apparently ran into issues. We're having KubeCon next week. Some of us will be there. The opening is a pre-event that is independent registration from KubeCon itself for prospective or existing contributors. Pre-registration's required. It may be too late to do that, but maybe not. There actually is a Sunday evening social taking place for anybody who arrives that early. And then Monday starts the formal things. One of the things going on during that contributor summit for the existing contributors is a face-to-face meeting of this very SIG. So those of us, those SIG members who are present in Barcelona and arrive by Monday morning, I expect to be at that SIG meeting. There's also a cloud provider meeting. The link is in the meeting notes. Then Tuesday, David and I are giving a good talk on And we're calling it an introduction to the vSphere CSI driver, but the fact is the Kubernetes community gives this SIG an intro and a deep dive. To be honest, as far as intros go, this is leaning more towards a deep dive label. As we started to prepare this slide deck, I think we realized that we could perhaps help the audience with some pretty detailed coverage of how to dig in and do troubleshooting, as well as some roadmap details that I don't think have ever been communicated before. It was only while we were getting the roadmap reviewed by some of the developers that we had some aha moments of, hey, what exactly are we going to do here? So I think there should be some interesting new material coming out at that presentation. Then Wednesday, there's a deep dive into the cluster API for vSphere. I was hoping that one of the speakers for that session would show up here, but not. So I can't add much more than what's already in that schedule link, which is the abstract. And I guess if you're interested in that, go there and learn all about the cluster API. I was going to reach out to any users who might have, I see a typo in the note. So let me fix that. Interested in a user face-to-face. This would be users of Kubernetes hosted on VMware infrastructure meeting up during KubeCon. But we don't seem to have anybody in the user category on the call live today. But if anybody watches the recording before KubeCon, feel free to reach out to me, email, Slack, ask for me in the VMware booth. You should be able to find me. And if we can get a critical mass, which I define as 3 people or more of users, maybe we can get together. It's during one of the event lunches or the evening party, which I believe is Wednesday night. So just throwing that out there if anybody is interested. Okay, let's move on to an active projects update. Fabio couldn't be here because he's at radio, but David, you're going to volunteer to cover this, so I'll turn it over to you.
Alrighty. So yeah, because radio's happening, we don't have anybody to represent the work that's going on in Cluster API. Hopefully we can have some people come back and backfill some of the notes. So just moving on to the Cloud Controller Manager. So there hasn't been much change for actually the past couple of meetings we've had. I was researching node affinity scheduling for vSphere and possibly folding that into the CCM, but there's now an effort in SIG Cloud Provider to do better topology-aware scheduling. And so hopefully if we provide enough input and we get, the things we need inside that effort, then we may be able to bite off the node affinity scheduling based on the increased topology awareness. So that's pretty much all that's happening in CCM. And then for the CSI driver, if Travis, you want to take this.
I can if you want. I was going to let you read it.
Yep. It doesn't matter either or.
You're doing a great job. Continue on.
Okay. Yeah. So then for the CSI driver, because of KubeCon, and we've had a number of updates since the last version that we've done. So we're planning on doing a release tomorrow morning, and we're hopefully tagging that as 020. That will still be an alpha release, even though it's a minor version bump there. That's, like I said, tomorrow morning is when we plan on doing it. Travis has been doing some testing and verification for the driver using Kind, so that's still active stuff that's going on. I believe to the extent of what is being proposed is to basically use Kind to just basically verify that we can deploy the driver and everything's functioning normally, and there's the normal communication between all the components within the CSI driver and a lot of the sidecar containers. And then we have 3 issues that are currently active. A lot of them have, we believe we have resolutions to them. So the first one is issue 17. where the node name has no node ID or annotation associated with that. And so this issue happens to be an interesting side effect of splitting out the CSI driver with the CCM repo and having each having their own separate repos, because they were contained in their own, they were contained together in a single repo. A lot of people deployed CCM and CSI just because all the instructions were all in one place in the documentation folder. And since breaking them out, now the documentation exists separately. So apparently a user had tried to deploy the CSI driver without deploying the CCM. And in doing so, you actually lose a lot of the labeling that actually happens on the CCM side. So we need to do a documentation update where we basically are going to say, hey, if you're going to deploy the CSI driver, you need to really deploy the CCM. Otherwise, it's not going to behave correctly.
Now, not only deploy it, but is there also a requirement that the versions be kept in sync?
Currently, no, we haven't really thought about it because we're going to do a bump on the CSI
Let's put it
driver.
this way. Does the testing always test them with a particular sync? Because if that's all we ever test, we might as well make that a stated requirement, because otherwise the user is QA, which usually isn't a good idea.
No, yeah, what I've been doing recently is just been testing latest. And I know for a fact, because I've been doing a lot of the work on the CCM, that the latest and what's there as currently in master, and then what the last release was, which is a 0.10, there hasn't been, or a 0.1x, there hasn't been any change whatsoever between the two. And so what's currently being tested is just latest CCM and like the current master or head of the CSI driver.
Well, those who are responsible for support, I guess, should be the ones who make the decision. But if it were left to me, I wouldn't claim to support things that aren't part of the test plan.
Yeah, definitely. And we definitely need to come up with, if we are going to do releases for CCM and CSI, like out of sync, or the versions can get, you have different versions, then we definitely need to have some sort of support matrix or something there, letting
it seems like there's probably little gain to supporting random combinations as well, right? I mean,
yeah, most definitely, I agree. And yeah, we just need to come up with that and just formalize it and put it down somewhere in writing.
I'm just curious, is it the labels that the CSI driver is depending on, or something else?
Yeah, it's the labels. So one good example is, because the provider ID gets updated on the CCM side. And another thing is the node name is also gets keyed off of on certain sidecar components on the CSI driver. And then most significantly, like it will not function unless you have the CCM installed. Zones will not work for CSI if CCM isn't running, because CCM is the one that actually does the zone labeling, right? And that ends up being picked up by the CSI driver. That is, so that last with the zones annotate, or the zones caveat there, that is documented, but it's only found in if I plan on using zones for the CSI driver. It does say to me that you need to have the CCM installed.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm happy to add that to the vSphere docs that Miles and I are working on. We did agree though for this release, we're not gonna document anything outside of like the provider configuration, so that the CSI docs might get pushed back to the next release. But if anyone has time to like add that doc in the meantime, that'd be great. And then we can just glue everything together in the end.
Okay, yep, sounds good. And then
let me know, Andrew, about the other doc that if nobody signs up for it. Just FYI, I think in Shanghai, I'm on the hook for a presentation on migration from in-tree to out-of-tree on cloud provider and CSI. So that I'm going to be digging around in that area anyway. So maybe you could talk me into working on docs.
Yeah, sounds good. Miles and I, yeah, we've started initial work, but I'll definitely loop you in later. Sounds good.
Alrighty. And then moving on, so issue 15, when a VMware node goes down, Kubernetes is unaware and the PV isn't released. So I did make a couple of changes. Unfortunately, those changes won't fix the overall issue because there happens to be a storage related issue inside Kubernetes, which is not calling the release. So without that functionality, actually, without the kubelet actually calling without the actual PV or the thing getting released, the PV is not going to get released, and you're basically going to get a pod that has it in process of termination, and unfortunately that termination's forever. I've cross-linked the issue in Kubernetes, in KK, so in Kubernetes, so you can have it there as a reference. Currently,
what's the status on that issue? Are they saying they're going to fix it in the next release cycle?
I don't know. It doesn't say. Currently, what the recommended workaround is, unfortunately, it's manual intervention, basically to kill the pod so it can get released. I don't know. I can go back and look to see if they clarify when they're going to get that fixed, but it seems like at this point they were still trying to get a handle on how to fix it and what the root cause is. But the point being that it's not only affecting our driver, there's other CSI drivers where this is being, where other people are getting affected. So
yeah, that sounds like a pretty severe issue.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, especially with manual intervention, that's not fun.
There's also some work that Yassine is working on regarding shutdown chains for nodes, which relate back to trying to detach a volume if a node goes down. That might be related as well.
Yep, and that actually could be related to number 4 too. So the next issue, number 4, is no vSphere disk ID name found. So we traced this back to a Kubernetes bug that was fixed, but it was fixed a while back, and I think the user was using an older version. And then on top of that, the version of Docker that was being used is very, very old. And I found a Docker issue where it could be, if a pod comes up or if a container comes up on Docker, and there are times where it can intermittently not release the disk and it will still hang on to it. So when the kubelet tries to actually do a release of the disk, it can't do it because the disk is still busy, right? So it still thinks it's actively being used and it can't detach. So I told the user, I haven't heard back. I need to check on it though, but I haven't heard back, and I asked the user to upgrade to the preferred Docker version that for that given version of Kubernetes, and I'm still waiting to hear back from that. And that's about it for all my updates.
Okay, thanks, David. So that's it for the active projects update. It's time for open forum and discussion. Nobody suggested any additional topics in the agenda doc. Does anybody online now have anything? Otherwise, maybe we'll just end early, and I'll see some of you people at KubeCon.
I had one question.
Sure.
So as part of writing docs, one part I'm stuck with is what the expectation is for cloud config. So we need cloud config on the master node, and it has credentials to talk to vCenter. But what is the expectation for the worker nodes?
Well, I believe that correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought the worker nodes might need creds for the zone support, or is that not true?
For in-tree, I believe that is true.
Okay.
For out-of-tree, so for the external, it's not required. It's only the CCM is only ever installed on the master node.
Okay, so for in-tree, if you want zone support, you need to have a vSphere configuration file with credentials. For out-of-tree, in every scenario, you only need vSphere cloud config file on the CCM.
Yeah, and those credentials, they're not actually in the config, right? Aren't they in a secret?
Yeah, you could have them in the config, but the highly recommended way is within a secret. You're right. Yeah.
Oh, for entry as well?
I thought that was the case, yeah.
I think that's the case too. Yeah.
I think the entry might go back so far that on a sufficiently old version, maybe that wasn't supported, but I believe that it's supposed to be in a secret.
Okay, thanks.
It might be wise. I mean, I think it will work if you don't put it in a secret, but it may be such a bad idea that perhaps it would be okay to avoid documenting it.
Okay. Yeah, I might have just misread the code. I had the impression that entry, everything's put into the config file, but I'll double check with that.
Yeah, and contact me, Andrew, if you run across an issue where the current docs are lacking, shall we say. That's exactly the kind of thing I'd like to cover in my talk in Shanghai. So let's not just fix the docs, but maybe go get out there with our presentations to point out misconceptions.
Yeah, and actually I was going to add on to that. I definitely know for a fact the entry can use secrets because I lifted some of that code. Whether or not the documentation actually accurately reflects that, it's a different story.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks for bringing that up, because I think this kind of thing, the more avenues we can get word out, the better for helping the user community get headed down the right path without incidents. Okay, anybody else have any last minute add-ons or questions? Okay, well, we'll end this one early, and I'll see some of you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.